We have among the cleanest and sharpest, crystal clean, you've heard me say it, I want crystal clean, air and water anywhere on Earth. You know, we have the cleanest air in the world in the United States, and it's gotten better since I'm president. We have the cleanest water, it's crystal clean.
America has the cleanest air and water in the world. We'll continue to use market forces.
We don't have the cleanest air and water in the world.
Have you noticed this weird thing that Trump and members of the administration do whenever they are confronted with their abysmal climate policy that's actively making the world hotter and more dangerous? They pivot very hard to a very demonstrable lie that under their tenure, the air and water in this country is the cleanest, in fact, the sharpest. First of all, it's not true. And second of all, it's kind of a non sequitur. And today they were at it again against a backdrop of truly biblical flooding in Washington, D.C. The president gathered up some cabinet secretaries and tried to tout his administration's environmental record.
We want the cleanest air. We want crystal clean water. And that's what we're doing. And that's what we're working on so hard.
I think the world needs to look at your leadership. Look at what you've done.
Today, we have the cleanest air on record, and we are a global leader for access to clean drinking water.
Of all this clean air and water talk and performative environmental concern is arousing your suspicions that it's just an attempt by the Trump administration to shore up what is a genuine political liability, you're correct. The New York Times reporting the idea for today's speech, quote, started with consultants on his reelection campaign who have discovered that his environmental record is a definite turnoff for two key demographics, millennials and suburban women. Which is to say, the public is actually onto the Trump administration. People do care about the climate crisis, and they know the Trump administration doesn't. And somewhat remarkably, the Trump White House itself understands that it's a political problem as we head into 2020. But if only the public knew just how bad the record really is. Here to talk about the administration's actual record on the environment, as opposed to the rhetoric, Emily Atkin, staff writer at the New Republic, who reports on science and environmental politics, and Tyson Slocum, the energy program director at the advocacy group Public Citizen. Emily, let me start with you because you've written about Andrew Wheeler, who is the man who replaced the almost comically corrupt Scott Pruitt, who made for excellent copy because he was such a ridiculous figure and he had his security detail driving around to different hotels whose soaps and lotions he liked. What has Wheeler's actual record at EPA been?
I mean, for Andrew Wheeler and Trump to say that they're leaders in protecting the environment, it's sort of like the Cookie Monster saying that he's a leader in vegetables. It's like, you know that they'll say they are, but they're not. And Wheeler and Trump will say that they are protecting the environment, but they're not. Under Andrew Wheeler and Trump, I believe it's 83 regulations that have been that are in the process of being rolled back, 49 of which have already been completed. Those are all environment, climate related. They span the gamut of drinking water, air protections, chemical protections. And Andrew Wheeler himself is a coal lobbyist. That was one of the other funny things about today's speech was that Trump brought up his Secretary of the Department of Interior, David Bernhardt, who's a former oil lobbyist, and he brought up Andrew Wheeler, a former coal lobbyist. These are the two people who are involved of repealing and creating new regulations that are supposed to protect our environment, when in reality what they're putting in are new regulations that are exactly what these industries want, that sort of allow them to operate in the most polluting way possible while still under the guise of that they're being regulated.
Tyson, as Emily refers to, the regulatory state, the modern regulatory state has a fair amount of power when it comes to things like clean water and clean air and regulating chemicals. On the question of climate, how much power does the executive have, and how has this administration used or not used that power?
The administration has enormous unilateral power. Remember, it was the Obama administration that unilaterally negotiated the Paris Climate Accord and got the rest of the world in line for a climate agreement that then Trump unilaterally dismantled. And you have to remember that one of the individuals that pushed hard to dismantle the climate agreement was Bob Murray, who was absent from today's events. But Bob Murray, the coal magnate who runs Murray Energy, which is the largest privately held coal company, which used to hire Andrew Wheeler to set up meetings for Bob Murray when he was meeting with President Trump. Murray Energy delivered this 16-point action plan of which repealing and getting out of the Paris Climate Accord was the #1 priority. And you have to remember that the Paris Climate Accord, Obama made a ton of concessions on that. He conceded to Republicans that it wouldn't be binding, that developing countries along with developed countries would be on it, and also that it would have fairly modest climate reduction goals. But the radicalness and the absurdness of the Trump administration is even dismantling something like the Paris Climate Accord.
Emily, having covered the Trump administration, do you agree with I mean, I am struck that he made the speech at all, and I'm struck that they have consultants telling them that this is actually a political liability for the president.
I think that the rhetoric that he used actually could work with a lot of Americans, and that's why I think they did it. Having covered Trump in general and Republicans and climate change, their rhetoric has shifted a lot in the last just 5 years. I mean, you remember 5 years ago, it was, there is no climate change, it's a hoax. And then it was, well, there is climate change, but it's natural caused, it's humans didn't cause it. Now, Republicans and Trump, they're confronted with the fact that the majority of the public realizes that there's a climate crisis and kind of wants them to do something about it. So almost the genius of this speech was that Trump took that and he was like, he didn't even say this, but the administration does as a whole. They say, okay, there's a climate crisis and humans might be responsible, but American humans are doing a really good job confronting it. You know, he said at one point, Trump didn't say the words climate change in his speech once, but he did actually say, he referenced carbon emissions. He said the U.S. has declined its carbon emissions. They've been down since 2000. It's strategic because we had our carbon emissions were awful in 2000, so obviously they've declined. But he's sort of saying the message that he and the administration are sending is that we're doing great. This climate crisis thing, that's up to the more polluting countries.
Is it progress, Tyson, at some level for them to have to deal with it, for them even to make the point as fallacious as it is about carbon emissions?
Absolutely not.
I mean, I think it shows how incredibly important clean air, clean water, and addressing climate change are to a large majority of American voters, which is why it is so distressing that this administration is doing so much aggressive, lasting damage on these critically important areas and placing former corporate lobbyists for the fossil fuel industry in charge of the federal regulatory apparatus. It has to end.
I think he's handed the Democratic nominee an enormous weapon in 2020. We will see if they use it. Emily Atkin and Tyson Slocum, thank you both. Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.